All right, hello, Allison. This is my response on your stance of that the assassination of Soleimani had a negative impact on national security in the Middle East and Iran in general. I disagree to an extent, but there's also a couple things I did agree with as well during your post there. And one of those was that it undoubtedly had a negative impact on Iran. Soleimani was a high-ranking general in the Iranian National Guard, and he would have overseen many cross-border military operations, mainly to push that influence. He called him a warrior and a spiritual leader, but to many in the Middle East, he was a terrorizer, funding these militia groups with very extreme ideologies to push Iranian influence on the region. Something you mentioned that I do agree with is that Americans tend to needlessly classify Middle Eastern men as terrorists, where you connected that with part of the reason why Soleimani was targeted in the first place. To an extent, I do believe that's true as Americans, through these couple decades of war within the Middle East, some people do have this underlying bias. But at the same time, we can't let these preconceived biases um, we can't ignore real threats to the region or our country in general just because they may fit into a stereotype of being a Middle Eastern man. A threat is a threat, regardless of ideology, religion, gender, etc. There's just bad people out there. With the assassination of the general, we were hoping to see a drop in these Iranian-backed militiamen across Iraq, Syria, Jordan, the Israel-Palestine region, in an attempt to disrupt their terrorism efforts in the region. A lot of the reasoning behind why you believe this was negative for national security in the region was based more on his popularity in Iran and among a handful of religious leaders just across the Middle East in general, where he was celebrated by many religious fundamentalists in Iran and those who support just the greater Iranian regime in general. Those aren't necessarily the people that you want to back you if you're going to push for a more peaceful stance across the Middle East, as there is a lot of tension with the protests going on in Iran now. Soleimani was against those protesters and any type of dissent against a more Islamic fundamentalist ideology. And you mentioned with the keeping of Assad in power, this is a tricky one because I personally believe that the Assad regime being in power is more of a negative national security um, impact for really the whole surrounding nation in general of Syria, but also Iran, as it was the Assad backed by his old guard in the first place that really pushed that revolution to happen by clamping down on different types of ideologies and discussion about better ways to run Syria. And Iran decided to back Assad just so they would have an ally in the region. A democratically elected government in Syria would have not fit Iran's needs. Sorry, would have not fit Iran's needs because a democratically elected government probably wouldn't want to work with Iran. And Soleimani pushed for the blowing up of multiple oil facilities in the region, which disrupted the rebel network and allowed the Assad troops to push a little bit farther. Um, and these oil facilities were also run by Saudis, who have a very big, kind of a rivalry with Iran. Just so that Iranian Saudi rivalry in general is really bad for security in the region as well. And that's all I got. Thank you for listening.